In the middle of retreat one, we always engage in a practice or an exercise we call a communal rule of life. Now, the communal rule of life is very different than the personal rule of life that we're going to engage asynchronously or on the platform after the first retreat. But the communal rule of life is an opportunity to help the community set the boundaries in which they get to behave and relate. And a communal rule of life is designed to create the safety necessary for everyone to know how to participate within a set of frameworks that allows safety and no one gets hurt. I usually introduce the communal rule of life by saying something like this, that all of us actually live within a communal rule of life right now, in that we all live by a set of traffic rules. And traffic rules and laws enable us to travel at very unsafe speeds and do things that are inherently dangerous without terror and panic. We can move at 60 miles an hour towards an intersection on a highway knowing that we're safe and without screaming our heads off, because we know that when the light turns red, I'm supposed to stop and everyone else is supposed to go. Or if the light's green, I can go through that intersection at really fast speeds, knowing that I'm not going to get T-boned from the side, because everyone else is generally participating in the rule of the road, the rule of life that helps us travel safely. A rule of life in the road doesn't prevent all accidents. Sometimes they get to happen, but allows us to travel without terror and allows us to know what's expected of us and what we can expect of others along the way. So when we engage in a communal rule of life in a cohort, what we're really doing is creating the rules of the road so people know how to engage and know what to expect of others and know what's expected of them, usually around areas that are sensitive. Can I share the truth? And will I get hurt? Will someone give me advice? Will someone tell this to someone else? What happens if I say something scary to myself, or I learn something about myself, or disclose something about myself? Those are all the things that could get people hurt along the way in the process. And we're trying to reduce that possibility of hurt or pain or difficulty in this journey. So we're helping people journey with each other with safety. So in the communal rule of life exercise, I explain that this is what it's like. Use the rules of the road analogy as a way of helping people understand what the process for, what the outcomes are about. And I would hand out a sample rule of life. It's in your packet. You have access to it in the materials online. And hand that out to the community and break them into groups of 3 people. Generally invite them to be in groups that are not their small group. To invite them to kind of mix their small groups a little bit so they're with 3 people. And I ask them to reflect around those sample rule of life for a community around a few different questions. One might be, if we had this in our rule of life, how would it help us? How would it help us communicate to one another and participate well? And if we had this rule of life, is there anything I would want to change about it? Is there language in it that doesn't make sense to me? Or would I want to add to it? Or is there something I want to augment to make sure it feels better to me? Or is there anything on this page you want to take away because you don't think it's necessary? Those are the kinds of things that we would ask people to reflect around. And so I'd break them into those groups and give them 15 or 20 minutes to talk about those questions in their groups of 3, no more than 4, but groups of 3. And then I would bring them back after that 15 or 20 minutes and we'd have a large group discussion. And this is where I generally have a whiteboard and I would take their comments one by one. I would start with one group. Hey, what's one thing that you liked? Or what's one thing that you might change? And we go systematically through that and collect information. Usually they talk about the number of the item on the sheet. And so we kind of take notes about those items, augment those items, take things away from those items, and make the items a little longer. And for you as a cohort leader, this is where you have to listen well, not influence it too greatly. You're a participant, but you're not the one who's to determine what this is. This is their opportunity to have control over their group. And that's one of the valuable processes of doing this out loud, is it gives the group the ability to define the rules for themselves and not have it imposed for them by an arbitrary leader. We generally take notes about this, what they like, what they don't like. Occasionally, as a cohort leader, I need to interject to say, now, if you move in this direction, here's some of the potential outcomes. And so I'm kind of guiding them, giving them insight about how other groups have done things or how they might need to be careful in some of that process. I will say, in every cohort I've led, we've never come up with a communal rule of life together in the room at the same time. It's a longer conversation. There's lots of different opinions. But what I generally do is invite 1 or 2 volunteers, sometimes 3, to take the input that's been given and that's been put on the board and land the plane for us with a different communal rule of life. Could you take what you've seen and what you've heard and represent it as best you can to create a new document for our cohort that you will send out? Generally, I take that document, send it by email to the whole cohort, and invite them to say, if you have a problem with this document, tell just me as the cohort leader. Don't send it to the whole cohort, because that's a hard conversation that can never land, the plane can never get landed. Just send it to me, and I'll try to figure out a way as a cohort leader to let the rest of the cohort leader that someone had a question about this. Do you mind if we change it in this way? In all of the cohorts I've led, no one has yet sent an email back to me saying they wanted to change it. And that's the exciting thing. The process and the conversation usually leads the community to a cohort communal rule of life that everyone can be comfortable with and satisfied with. And here's the secret. They're comfortable with it and they're satisfied with it because they had a hand in creating it. The process of defining what confidential meant, whether they can say it outside their small group or outside their cohort, was all that they needed. And here's a secret I don't want you to tell the whole group of participants, is generally, once we've created the communal rule of life, it has satisfied all that's necessary for that process and for that practice. We almost never have to come back to it. The process of creating a document that defines safety and defines the expectations of behavior. Do we give each other advice? Do we not? What does confidentiality mean? All of that creates everything that people need to move forward with a sense of safety, to move quickly in this journey of transformation. Now, I say that occasionally a mentor might have to come back to a person in a small group to say, hey, remember our rule of life. Let's remember, Bill, that we don't give advice. Or let's remember that we listen and be attentive. We're not trying to fix or change. But that's very rare. The process is almost always very effective in creating an environment that people feel safe now to journey in what might be unsafe practices, where there aren't expectations and understandings of how people are to behave.